everyone. Hey, little child, Cameron. How was the weekend? Silent. The weekend was silent. Did anybody do anything? Nathaniel, you just get off work?
No.
Okay.
I went to go drop off rent.
Next door.
For some reason, I'm the only. I wish I had to drive to the office.
Would you have to take it to the actual, like, Warner office, or can you just like put it in his mailbox next door?
Nope.
That's a little weird.
Actual office.
Yeah, because he just has two houses. It's the same guy.
Yeah. So I drop it off with the property manager, and then if she's not there, then the other one who actually lives in his house next door.
Oh, okay.
So I
Huh.
feel like I should just like wave her down before she leaves.
Yeah. Just leave it on the porch.
Yeah. But it's not. I mean, it's like right down the street. It's like by that Starbucks on Pacific.
Yeah. I know
But,
the Warner house with the sloping roofs and whatever.
stands out of Miracle Mile.
Yeah. Right across from that brick house.
Mm-hmm.
Hunter, you went to a farmer's market. Those are open again?
Yeah, the one at the Weberstown Mall.
Okay.
Like the next to the UEI college thing, like across from Dick's.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that one. It's honestly been open, I think, the whole time, every Sunday.
Okay. I imagine the people who go to farmers markets are less likely to go to populated things. I have no idea if that's true, but yeah, if the type of person who is getting their vegetables from a farmer's market, maybe they're not the same people who question about the comps. Yeah, just whenever is fine. Yeah, March 1st. It's just, that's an early, if you can turn it in kind of early and get it off your agenda, that would be great. But Ross, yeah, I saw a few people's emails. I haven't had a chance to respond yet about the other classes, and during this week I'll get the remaining comp questions out to everybody. For the classes that you've taken, I'll get Peter and Mark, and I'll amass all of those and send you the bank other than mine. But it's just the earlier you can turn these things around. It's not hard this semester because it's COVID. It's home. You just sort of write a nice essay, and so if you can do it during the course of this month, that would be great. If it drags into March or whatever, that's fine too. Drags into April, okay, whatever. But just if if it's getting like, okay, graduation is taking place, still don't have the comps. I mean, now it's time to whatever, lighting of fires and stuff. But yeah, it's just the March 1st thing. That's not a real deadline. That's me saying like, oh, if you want to just get this thing out of the way so you don't have to stress about it. I'll send out the stress phys one at some point, and you guys can write your own question for stress phys, and I'll happily grade that. If for the comprehensive exams for stress phys, if you want to just like write your own and answer it, or I'll come up with something. All right, let me pull up the lecture. All right. So we're going to do physical inactivity. I think we're going to stretch this off into 2 lectures, and then so we'll do today and Wednesday on sedentary behavior. What happens to us during physical inactivity, and then we'll do injuries after that. If excesses of load, excesses of whatever, what does that look like during the presence of injury? So last time was the overtraining. This is sort of undertraining. It's the inverse of that, We're good with all of this stuff. Interrupt me if you have a question, or if you have something you just want to chat about, feel free to interrupt at any point. Just leave yourself unmuted and say stuff if you want. Oh, specificity, the proteins, right? The Goldilocks zone, overexpressing a single direction and having a inappropriate opposition of forces, development according to environment, or just a bunch of dorsal fins. This is going to come back today. I'm going to have this gentleman here in the slides later as we talk about physical inactivity and what those stresses look like. So this idea of the folded, flaccid or folded fin syndrome is going to come back. Specificity of adaptation in all things, in all training, in all deterioration, and all enhancements. It's all going to be specificity, whether it is training techniques, whether it is particular sport skill development, whether it's cognitive performance in something. And making sure you employ this stuff appropriately. Sometimes it feels like we're employing specificity of adaptation, and we're kind of not, because we take this gist in an inappropriate way, and we kind of contort that gist to say something that specificity doesn't. And that's what the Iowa thing was about. But just make sure you know size principle, sort of the foundation of muscle physiology, but a lot of adaptation, development, progress, enhancement, all of this is the foundation of that is size principle of making sure that that's the governing principle of skeletal muscle recruitment and development. And specificity of adaptation sort of stems from that. And so there's a too much stress, there's a too little stress. What you want to do is sort of meet in the middle, and it depends on the individual, right? It depends on the person, it depends on their age, their history of exercise, illness conditions. It depends on the climate they're exercising in. It depends on allostatic contributions if there are other stressors. And so this last time stuff that we were talking about, ACSM's guidelines. This is the 9th edition. There's a 10th edition that's out. There will be an 11th and a 12th and a 13th. They're all sort of the same thing, because the foundation of information on stuff like cardiovascular risk hasn't changed in quite some time. And so this one had the cleanest table 2. I have the 10th edition if you're interested to see what that looks like. I can give you that too. But I uploaded this in Canvas, and so the table 2.2, the whole chapter 2 is uploaded. The part Q is not a part of this. This is its own thing, but both of these are from ACSM's testing. Now, high risk people, these are people who have known conditions or have signs. They have signs, they have symptoms of conditions. I mean, their ankles are super swollen, and they're in heart failure at the time. So okay, well, just because they don't have a diagnosis, maybe they haven't been to a doctor since the Reagan administration, and it's like, well, doctors, every time I go to a doctor, I'm diagnosed with something, or they ruin my life or whatever. So I don't do hospitals. It's sort of old world, kind of the farmer attitude of I don't do hospitals, which I kind of applaud. But this idea of maybe there are signs, and just because there isn't a known diagnosis of something, they're still high risk. You still don't want to have those people do anything. And the rest of it, though, if you go back to this and you can go through and figure out how many risk factors people have, if they are 0 or 1, those are the low risk people. These are the people who are really at risk of overreaching and overtraining, because you can kind of do whatever you want with them. Once you get into moderate and certainly high risk people, this isn't really the class that finds themselves in states of overtraining. Really, the low risk people who exercise so hard and consistently and take so few breaks find themselves in states of overtraining. And so it'd be helpful to be able to do case studies. These would just be normal case studies. At the very end of this, I have some weirder case studies, some more less common presentations for case studies. Say somebody comes to you, it's an athlete. Somebody comes to you, it's a parent. Somebody comes to you, it's a door-to-door like solicitor. Whoever it is comes to you. you want to know how risky it is for you to have them start exercising. A lot of athletes, I mean, there are athletes on campus at Pacific, competitive athletes who have, diabetes and who have asthma. And I mean, there are diagnoses of D1 athletes just right here on campus. Everywhere you go, you'll find surprising health limitations or considerations everywhere you go. Everyone has something weird. And you just remember what overreaching and overtraining look like in the onset of these things. There is individuation in how these manifest, how they accumulate, how stress builds and builds and builds and sort of takes away and takes away and takes away if you just don't give yourself ample recovery. And remember, lots of stuff is going to affect that recovery: hydration and sleep and other stressors and the characteristics of exercise and age. There are so many variables that are going to affect the rate of recovery. You just finished training, you're really depleted. You want to get back to a full recovery before you exercise again, so that you're not depleting chronically, so that you're not depleting from a already depleted state. And that's when you'll start seeing this gradual deterioration. It's not going to affect your performance right away. But when you find yourself in functional overreaching, you might even have maintaining performance for a part of that. But to improve performance, you got to take a little bit of time off. So recovery, optimizing your recovery, really is key to making progress in athletics. And that's something that people don't seem to understand in collegiate sports. Is a lot of coaches, not all, many coaches have a history of education and understand, and they've gone through the collegiate sport endeavor, where it's like, oh, I remember being a student and actually being a real student and keeping a GPA up. And I wasn't just a pro player. I mean, even go to the Ohio States and UConns and LSUs and go to all these places where there are large athletics programs. And do those athletes go to class? No. They just have tutors who do everything for them. The tutors who have the answers for the tests. And I mean, it's not about school at some of these programs. And so you spend a couple of years, let's say it's basketball or something, you spend a couple of years in college at some big program, and then you get drafted and you go to the NBA, and you have no idea what it's like to be a student. I mean, it's a foreign world. I have no idea what it's like to live in Uzbekistan, and it would be ludicrous, some combination of like ludicrous and racist, for me to pretend like I have an idea of what it's like and say, no, here's what you can handle. And yet, that's what college coaches do, who have literally no idea. They have as much of an idea of what it's like to be a college student as I do what it's like to be a resident of Kazakhstan or whatever. And so a lot of the problem in collegiate coaching is they have no idea what the allostatic load is and how it affects people. And so the rate of recovery is compromised, and we see deterioration of performance, and we see, if everything from adrenal insufficiency to elevated injury to increased risks of infection and all of these complications from just like, man, you should have just rested more. You should have just not worked as hard. If you worked less hard, you would have been so much better of an athlete if you didn't work so hard. And that would be, everyone would love to work less hard and be a better athlete. And that's commonly what you would experience in a college setting, because the coaches don't know any better. But what you see is these axes, disruption of axes, hypothalamic, whatever, right? Hypothalamic pituitary, whatever, is really what an anterior pituitary is what's going to go through, and then go to the thyroid, to the gonads, to the liver for your IGF, downstream from growth hormone, the bulk of your insulin-like growth factor. People talk about growth hormone as having all these really pronounced, profound effects on skeletal muscle regeneration and growth, and really most of the tissue interaction is a result of IGF, insulin-like growth factor, which gets released from the liver in response to growth hormone release from the anterior pituitary. So And we see problems with growth and remodeling, right? With that, and testosterone too, and a lot of metabolic disruption, thyroid, right? T3, T4, but this is a thing that really starts to get, let's just call it wonky, because that's a physiological term. And remember that Hans Selye, he talked about that general alarm reaction where we're getting our corticosteroids, cortex, adrenal cortex, cortisol, right over here. And then we get our adrenaline or epinephrine from the adrenal medulla or medulla. And so that's the HPA axis over here. We start to get disruption, this hypothalamic disruption, and this is the one area, overtraining, in which we can mount a gas defense, right? A defense of Hans Selye's general adaptation syndrome. The one sort of circumstance in which what he outlined looks sort of true, where we're getting into overtraining. Now, it's not really an adaptation, it's maladaptation, right? It's compromise, but sort of what he characterized. If we have this general alarm reaction and we try to hang on as long as we can, and then we get into exhaustion and we see all of this, excessive cortisol and stripping of the immune system, and psychological stress, and endocrine disruption, all this stuff down here. So that's the one narrow circumstance in which Hans Selye, we can say, yeah, okay, general adaptation syndrome, you have a point here. Nowhere else, though, right? Nowhere else does Hans Selye make the tiniest bit of sense. Now, moving forward, we have the Whitehall study. So let me just frame where we're headed and where we've been. This is like a little intermission where I say there's more to the story. Just because I'm saying stuff and that stuff seems to make sense, hopefully it makes sense. And that doesn't mean what I'm saying is the whole picture. That, okay, we start at the prologue and we end at the epilogue, and I know everything that happened. Not true, right? This is a piece of a larger narrative, and the larger narrative is largely unknown. Donald Rumsfeld, very polarizing political figure in the Bushes, those administrations. He, Secretary of Defense under W, he had that great line about there are known knowns, there are known unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns. And this is where we're seeing known unknowns, and I'm sure there are unknown unknowns here too, about where does risk come from? In this case, with the Whitehall studies, where does cardiovascular risk come from? I mean, this stuff started in the 60s. It's still, I think it's winding down. I think Whitehall 2, they enrolled a bunch of people in 1985, ages 35 to 55, and followed them for 20 years. A longitudinal study. Let's follow these people. And so, the 35-year-olds, by 2005 were 55-year-olds, and the 55-year-olds are 75-year-olds, and it keeps going. And the last I saw was like 2020. So I'm not sure if the study is still ongoing, but it has been ongoing for an awfully long time. And that one is looking at both men and women and looking at what variables are predicting mortality. It's hard to do a mortality study if it's not longitudinal. If you just look at a group and say, all right, what's your risk of death? Well, here's what your blood pressure is. Here's your obesity state, your BMI, whatever, some obesity status, your smoking status, diagnoses, illnesses. If you look at these things and say, here's your risk of death. Well, how do you know? Because you have to follow them until they die to know what their risk of death was. And so that's what the Whitehall studies were doing. And one of the major things that this has found and continues to find is that power inequality, where you are in not just a tax bracket, that matters, but where you are in the hierarchy of things. So let's compare two professions that are very similar. PA, physician assistant, right? And PT, physical therapist. Similar in terms of, I don't know, they're not that similar, but they're both healthcare. And a physician assistant, I don't know, maybe you're making $30,000, $40,000 more than the PT. If you're a PA, You're making a lot more money than the PT. You can start the job sooner, sort of. It's only 2 years of education. PT school lasts longer, but it's a little bit harder to get into PA programs. You need a lot more contact hours, patient contact hours. So, but let's say hypothetically, you can become a PA even younger because there's a tiny bit less schooling. And PA, you can prescribe drugs, right? A PT, you can't prescribe any drugs. PA has all of these sort of hierarchical permissions and salary and everything, but a physician assistant, it's like, here boy, here boy. There's a hierarchy. You are not at the top, and it is very evident in the way people work that they're not they're reminded every day. Ask a PA if they think of themselves as physicians, and very much know that the doctors are, that cliche of M-deity, where they think so highly of themselves, and they sort of belittle people around them. Not all of them. Not all of them. Many, though. It's a common, when you do sort of sociological sort of questionnaires about the workplace experience and stuff, that commonly gets reported of the M-deity phenomenon of like, all right, yeah, we have to like bow and stuff to and so there's a hierarchy with PAs. If you're the PT, you're at the top of where you are. Not if you're in the hospital, right? Not if you're doing inpatient stuff, but if you're outpatient PT, you're like the top guy or gal there. And so considering variables like that and how it might affect your health, how it might affect your well-being, how it might affect your emotions and your cardiovascular risk, your risk of mortality. So these Whitehall studies were looking at this sort of totem pole of the hierarchy. And what we see, what was found, what the researchers are disseminating, what they're reporting, is job insecurity. That's a risk for cardiovascular disease, right? Job insecurity. If you have super job security, that helps. Inconsistency in your status, right? So if your work demands and commitments and responsibility, if there's inconsistency there, ambiguity, inconsistency, that is a risk of mortality. That's cardiovascular risk. Social support structures from your coworkers and your colleagues and employees and managerial folks. And so if there's social support, or is it sort of a hostile competitive workplace? Is it very collaborative and supportive? Or that is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease, just like blood pressure is, just like cholesterol is, just like age is, just like family history is. These are all risk factors. A huge one is, do you have control in your daily tasks, your agenda? Do you have decision-making ability? That is a big risk factor. Again, just like blood pressure or glucose regulation problems or smoking status. Are you in control of your daily decisions? Work demands and pressures, these are also risk factors. So what you do for work and where you reside is a huge set of risks. And what has been reported, maybe not the final values or the final understanding, but what has been reported is, if you're down here, if you're this whatever bird or whatever it is down here at the very bottom of the totem pole, your risk of mortality at that low grade of employment, it's custodial or it's customer service or whatever you consider sort of low grade, entry level, low grade, you have a threefold higher risk of mortality than the people at the top. These sort of CEOs and the chief whatever O's. The risk of mortality is threefold higher if you're at the bottom. And when you look at things like blood pressure, right now we think, you have hypertension, stage 1, stage 2, we get into these hypertensive emergencies, you get above there, blood pressure, leisure time, smoking status, whether somebody smokes or doesn't, diagnoses. Let's control all of the diagnoses. Do you have diabetes? Do you have, coronary artery disease? Do you have COPD? Control all of these illnesses. Control amount of physical activity. Let's hold let's control, let's hold constant the amount of physical activity people are getting. Their height, that height can matter too. Shaquille O'Neal and Nathaniel, that there's a risk there that shorter folks don't have. All of these things, from blood pressure on up, control all of those, and we see less than 40% of the risk of CVD, of cardiovascular related death being explained. All of these physiological factors that we look for. Yeah, sure, less than half of the likelihood of mortality is being explained by those things. More than 60% is explained by other variables. Now, known unknowns and unknown unknowns. And so that's what the Whitehall studies have taught us and are continuing to teach us, is there's lots of shit going on. So we can't pretend like we know everything. And you get into more of these mystery risks, and you're looking at atherosclerosis in mummies, in these ancient populations, and mean age of death for mummies who with atherosclerosis, 43 years old, right? And so 43 years old, and their arteries are filling up with plaque. And 32 years old, mean age of death without. That just means they died of things before they were able to, spear in face whatever the cause of death is. They're dying of things before their vascular channels had a chance to deposit a bunch of plaque. So, but think about these mummy populations. Was there anything, quote, inorganic in their diets? No, that didn't exist, right? It was all local, tons of veggies, and the stress profiles were remarkably different from today, and yet we're seeing cardiovascular disease in mummies. So all I'm saying is we're going to talk about risk factors. We're going to talk about how stress affects us, but we don't have the full picture. We have a partial picture. And in that partial picture, we can be pretty confident with risks and with how diseases manifest, but it's incomplete. Our understanding is incomplete. So, sedentary behavior. It's just safe spaces, right? This is safe spaces. They're comfortable. They're convenient. There's relaxation happening. I'm reclined and nothing is threatening me, and I'm comfortable. And this safe, the ultimate. That's not what the word ultimate means, but the great safe spaces of the world. Horrible for us, worst possible thing we can do. And epidemiological data, if you start looking at analyses in every country in the world that has a statistician living there, every country in the world, we've even done our own internal analyses working with the Uganda Bureau of Statistics. So we have gone to Uganda and worked with statisticians at their federal agency with it's equivalent to the U.S. Census Bureau, but way better. The U.S. Census Bureau is populated by high schoolers. It's honestly a horror. It's one of the worst. We have no idea what we're doing with the U.S. Census Bureau. Uganda is, it's everyone has at least a master's degree in statistics. It's not just a bunch of high school grads. So it's a really good version of the U.S. Census Bureau, and we find the same thing there. As in areas of Uganda that have more technology, and as people get more refrigeration and access to how far do you have to walk for water, and do you have an automobile, and we're seeing worse health outcomes with all. You'd think that stuff would enhance their health, but everywhere in the world, no matter where you go, you're going to find the same thing. You can go to PubMed, you can go to whatever, and just search this stuff for the rest of your life, and you'll never read all of the papers because these things are coming out faster than the pace of reading. And they all say effectively the same thing. Do not be sedentary. Do not sit around all day. You put on a Fitbit and you sit there for 50 minutes and it buzzes and says 250 steps to go, unless you're sitting there and if you sit like I do and you're moving your hands around, you're talking and you're very animated, then it might say, 212 steps to go or whatever. That matters. And I'll explain how that matters in a minute. But that's not just Fitbit saying, oh, let's just give people advice for the sake of advice, and let's boss people around, and people like that. People love being bossed around. That's not what it's doing. It's actual data that are very compelling. Um, that when you look at sedentary behavior, sitting and physical inactivity, compared to cigarettes, and we're having comparable risk, different presentation of symptoms and compromise, but comparable risk. So, I talk about this often enough. The very act of not squatting may be as important in terms of creating a biomechanical environment as squatting itself. So we're constantly paying attention to our environment. And so remember earlier this semester, I was talking about the absence of stress is a stressor. Every single thing is a stressor. You're sprinting, that's a stressor. It's hot out, that's a stressor. You're a little bit dehydrated, that's a stressor. You're sprinting away from a lion, that's a stressor. Um, you're sprinting toward a loved one who hates you, that's a stressor. All of these things are stressors. You sitting down in a safe space is one of the worst stressors that you can subject yourself to. Sprinting, wonderful. It depends on the person. It depends on the ability to tolerate that stress. But none of us is particularly equipped to tolerate safe spaces. We just degrade and atrophy and wither. And that's a stressor, and our body is going to respond to it. So kinesiology, this is sort of the opposite. This is us moving. So let's go to Wikipedia, and I don't know what it says today. I pulled that page up a while ago, but kinesiology, right? We're moving. This is the study of movement, and the study of the absence of movement is pretty damning. The absence of movement is pretty damning. The incorporation of movement, the use, the employment, the participation in movement is really reinforcing. It is prolonging of our health span, not just lifespan. Lifespan isn't interesting anymore. Lifespan is okay. You're like awake, and you're not currently in a coma, but you might as well be. That's like lifespan. Yeah, you're 106, but when was the last time you kept drool in your mouth? Well, I was 74. What the hell happened these last 32 years or whatever? Health span is what matters. You want to be the 100-year-old who's running marathons. That's maybe you don't want to do the marathon, but you want to be the 100-year-old with that capacity. And so why is movement important? Why do we care about movement? Why is movement important? And we see things, I mean, broccoli, right? The sulforaphane stuff. It can't swat broccoli and this fern, and it can't swat away its predators, the flies and bugs and everything that's going to eat it. So it's synthesizing its own chemicals. We can, right? We're not synthesizing, pesticides inside of us. We have to move to go get our calories. So we have to use our legs and use our arms and our postural muscles and our aerobic capacities for food acquisition. And so it's built into our anatomy and our physiology of movement is. So the way we go, capture Pokemon or whatever, we have to use tissues. How do we move? Well, muscles cross joints, and those muscles shorten, and those joints come together, and now suddenly we're walking. So this is James Levine. He's at Mayo Clinic, huge name, MD, PhD. Every once in a while, we have this resurgence of the idea that movement is important, that sedentary living is a problem, and movement is important. Movement is therapeutic. Every once in a while, this happens, and then it fades, and it fades, and it fades, and then somebody brings it back. And the most recent resurgencer, if we're going to coin that word, is James Levine, and he's published a lot on this, done a lot of research on this. This is his sort of more colloquial, the book that sort of for the everyman and the every woman and the everybody. But there's a lot of research that he has done that comments on this. Now, perspective of movement from skeletal muscle from anatomical kinesiology, right? Movement, the use of muscles to move. A lot in life happens at the pelvis, right? So this is, we're going to send our genome into a future form, right? That's at the pelvis. Waste, right? We're going to dispose of our garbage, our biological garbage. Okay, let's pass that through the pelvis. Athleticism, right? I mean, it's the base of your spine and the roof of your legs. Athleticism, it's really, the pelvis is an important core. If we're going to talk about a core, that's not like, whoa, make sure you do your balance ab thing, whatever. Let's get into the foundation of this, the pelvis. That's where we're really at the core. And you look at the psoa or psoas muscles. The psoas major, this thing originates all over the place in your spine. The psoas major right here, all over the place. It's attached to at least 22 structures. Maybe more than that. Every single vertebra from the bottom of your rib cage to your sternum, it attached to every single one of those things. It acts on more joints than any muscle I know of in the body, than any single muscle I know of in the body. Really important, the psoas major. And its insertion is down there. The psoas minor, we don't all have a psoas minor. Numbers get reported, 40% to 70% of people have this thing. Let's just say it's half. Let's say half of people have a psoas minor. You can think of this thing as, because we don't all have the same musculoskeletal anatomy. Perhaps we don't all have the same number of bones, but we're like bipedal, these upright bipedal creatures, and so we think of ourselves as if we mirror, with exception of like a heart and a liver, that where we are, our right side, right, and our left side, we have the same number of muscles, and you have your bicep on one side and on the other, and your triceps on one side and the other. I don't even have the same number of muscles on my right arm as I do on my left arm. The palmaris longus, I have one in my right and I don't have one in my left. My right and left arms are unequal in the number of muscle fibers. So we're all a little bit different. Some of us have a psoas minor, some of us don't have this thing. The iliacus, this is another one. This little muscle right here. Notice the same point of insertion down here. You don't need to know origins and insertions of any of these things, but the psoas, the name, is a little bit fascinating. I mean, it used to, this French anatomist, we used to call it things like fox's tail and womb of the kidney. They had these other names, but muscle of the loins is the psoa. But the name of this thing, in the 1600s, that French anatomist gave us name, but it shouldn't be the psoas as the plural. Houses to houses, right? With Latin, it should be the psoe is actually what the name should be, is the psoe. Think it'd be like calling spaghetti spaghettos. Right, a spaghetto is singular for spaghetti. Spaghetti is plural. Panini is plural, right? A panino is an individual, and so sometimes I'll go to like a sandwich shop. I don't eat bread, but you see, like, you order the salad or something else, and in the pre-COVID era, and you see paninis. Whoa, how many is that? I mean, you're doubling. Panini is already plural. Paninis. I mean, this is like exponential amount. I don't know if I can finish all that. But psoe should be the name. Psoas, who cares? Again, the stuff of womb of the kidney. But the iliopsoas, this is often in the anatomy textbooks. You'll see this muscle called the iliopsoas. That's not a muscle. This guy was super smart. Super smart. We're going to talk about Odson and DeLuca. There's this great article. Carlo DeLuca is a wonderful researcher. He died, but he was a wonderful researcher, and I'm pretty sure he died. If you the late Carlo DeLuca, and if he's still alive, I'm pretty sure he died. But This is the guy who coined, iliopsoas, saying that they're not independent muscles. That the psoas and the iliacus, they share an insertion, so the same thing. Not even close to true. But the reason I bring this muscle up is it's a problem when you get into sedentary living. So, the iliacus, all of these muscles, they're going to adapt to the loads that are placed upon them. So if you wear high heels, what's going to happen? Well, the gastroc shortens. The gastroc is a 2-joint muscle, right? Crosses the knee too. And so you're going to eventually see knee flexion, the hamstrings are going to cross up and you're going to have low back pain. So we're going to see this X bone connected to the Y bone. We're going to see this working its way up the body. And the iliacus, if you're sitting a lot, you're going to have this stunted, this short iliacus, and that's going to change the orientation of everything, your posture and all of your athleticism at that core, right? That pelvic core, everything is going to start changing. But you're going to potentially see nerve problems as well. So earlier, in some earlier lecture, we talked about the brachial plexus, where if you are, Ross, you said let me pull up the comment box in case anybody is, there are comments. Trump looks like an adrenal gland. That's funny. So any interns, I don't remember the intern thing. I've probably been a while since the intern. I don't remember the totem pole. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So interning, that's not, if you do it for a short term, you can handle it. Long term interning, yeah, that's not good for your health, right? Because you just get bossed around, right? You have the job insecurity. You're like the new person there, and you have no decision making ability, and if there's ever been inconsistency of work demands and status and stresses and responsibilities and whatever, interns. So yeah, Ross, you're spot on with that totem pole with the Whitehall studies. Now it's a short-term endeavor. You go do it for like 6 months or something. It was like, oh, I'm a serial internist. I just intern into my internship after internship, and like, I don't know what your vasculature is going to look like in your heart, and your lifespan are going to look like. And really nice point there. So in some earlier lecture, we were talking about the brachial plexus, runs between the clavicle and the first rib, the highest rib. Your posture rolls forward, as it usually does in life. People's posture sort of hunches forward, and you press down on that collarbone, that clavicle, and the highest rib, and in that groove running between there is the brachial plexus and the subclavian artery, subclavicle, beneath the clavicle. But the brachial plexus runs through there. So postural deformities are going to affect the nerve conduction of everything in your arms. But like everything, the lumbar plexus, that is actually embedded in the psoas, right? The lumbar plexus is embedded in the psoas. And so you're going to wind up with a lot. Look at the nerves are just in there. They're embedded in that. And so if you start shortening this thing and changing it, it's similar. It's the lower body equivalent of hunched shoulders. And so sit and sit and sit and sit, shorten, 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 shorten. You can wind up with neural problems in addition to postural and performance problems and function. And if you've ever taken Peg Ciccolilla's kinesiology class, the psoas paradox of how these muscles, what their function is in the body. But the problem, none of this is limited to anatomical kinesiology. So this author, Layla Africa, whatever his name is, Nutricide, I think he's the one who coined it. Now, I'm not saying like go read this book, because it's sort of trespasses into weird, funny, non-science, but it's this idea of nutricide. That's the only thing I'm going to tease out of this author's work, is that an appropriate dose eating is healthy, right? An appropriate dose. You need a certain number of calories, right? If you go into starvation mode, that is unhealthy. There's a certain amount of nutrition that is healthy. There's an excess of nutrition that is a stressor that is going to be threatening to your continued existence. It's the same thing with sitting, with sedentary behavior, with physical inactivity. There's a certain amount that's healthful, that bestows great health. There's recovery is going to happen. Now, you can't just stand and walk and move all day long, right? You're going to deteriorate. That stress needs a chance to depart. It needs a chance to, like, all right, we need to rest. There's an amount of sitting, there's an amount of physical activity, sedentary behavior, whatever you want to call it, that's healthy. There's a too much that is unhealthy. There's a too much that is historical. And so this is just the, dwelling on the fringes. So he got a doctorate in naturopathy from Anglo-Saxon Institute. That doesn't even have like a .edu webpage. I mean, that's like a .com thing. That's not real. That's not a thing. But then whenever anybody is like, okay, I'm a massage therapist and an herbalist and a historian and a writer and a lecturer and a teacher. I don't know what the difference between teacher and lecturer is. And a medical astrologist. Whoa, that one's weird. That's not a thing. And so I'm an acupuncturist and a metaphysician. Physicians. Okay, whatever. So it gets a little bit crazy. But nutricide, what a term. That's a great term, like killing through excesses of nutrition. Gets a little bit dangerous, and it's like, all right, why don't we all in one shot? Let me cure cancer, lupus, and diabetes, and let's relax our hair while we're at it. So it gets a little bit like, I mean, but nutricide, give praise where praise is deserved, right? Credit where credit is due. Nutricide, excesses of a good thing are a bad thing, usually. Now, when we get into that domain of bad thing, right? When we get into deterioration of health, this spiraling of bodily function and performance and well-being, whatever our health is tumbling down the mountain. That's not chance. It's probably not chance. It is stressors. Now, maybe the stress is pollution, and that is the reason the lungs are misbehaving, right? It could be mold, it could be mycotoxins or something. It could be the forest fires. It could be any sort of pollen, maybe. It could be air quality, right? Maybe the stressor is circadian, right? Maybe there's rhythm disturbances and travel stress, and maybe the stress. It could be bacterial. It could be microbiome, right? In your gut microbiome. The stress could be physical exertion. The stress could be anything, but it's unlikely to be chance. Could be just genetic lottery that was unfortunate that you drew the equivalent of a short straw, right? Possible. But most of the time, this is not a matter of chance. This is a matter of loads. It's a matter of stresses, the presentation of those stresses, the magnitude of those stresses, the persistence of those stresses, and the way you tolerate them and the summation of them. So sitting, physical inactivity, we're not talking, overreaching and overtraining here. We're talking the opposite of that. We're talking nothing. Nothing is one of the biggest stressors there are. And if you just sit in one of these chairs for a long time, go through the alphabet, right? Arthritis and blood pressure and cancer, or cholesterol problems and diabetes, deep vein thromboses, emphysema, fat accumulation, gastrointestinal and glycemic things, and heart fat. You go through the alphabet. Now, if you want to say, well, blood pressure, let's call that one hypertension. Fine, let's throw bed sores under the B. That's going to happen to you too. Throw on asthma with the arthritis. In the D's, let's go ahead and put depression there. Let's send the alphabet beyond N, LMNO. Osteo things, bone anything, osteoporosis, and let's get into the P's, and we have postural problems, and you just go, I don't know what the hell, come up with an X and a Z and stuff, and maybe we're getting into prescription medications. But you go through the alphabet, and it's just pretty much everything. I mean, really near everything is going to manifest from this excesses of sedentary living, and a number of mechanisms. But let's stick with the cardiovascular problems. You don't want to throw clots around, right? Thromboses. You don't want to have regulation issues in clot formation. that is bad. Okay, an enzyme, a phosphatase. Let's remove phosphates from things. An enzyme that is going to contribute to the regulation of clotting and inflammatory responses is LPP1, lipid phosphate phosphatase, um, and so we're going to regulate some of this cardiovascular threat here. Now, this is sensitive to the amount of sedentary activity that you experience. So if you look at what we should be, right, LPP1, this is your control. This is like, oh, we're walking around and standing around. This is just normal person, normal walking, normal doing your thing. You're at the farmer's market, right? Hunter's at the farmer's market. Here's LPP1. And then Hunter goes home from the farmer's market, puts the groceries away, and inactivity, 12 hours of inactivity, LPP1, man, you like cut that thing in half, right? Cut that thing in half. And this, I've been sedentary for a long time. I better go get a 2-hour exercise session in. I'm gonna go do some, cardio and weightlifting, and I'm gonna do my whatever, my plyometrics, and I'm gonna go do a bunch of exercise for 2 hours. Not as good as just wandering around. You don't repair. Physical activity is not the opposite of physical inactivity. You do not repair the damage done by sedentary behavior. They're two totally different stressors. Is there overlap, right? Is there overlap in an Edward Adolph kind of way? Sure. Yeah. Exercise is going to address some of the issues that physical inactivity addresses, but not all of them. These are two separate stressors. It's not just a spectrum and like, okay, I was on this side of the spectrum. Let me correct by some activity on this side of the spectrum. That's not how it works. These are unique fingerprints. We respond to inactivity and activity totally differently. And that's the reason it just happened. How many steps do I have left? I have 180 steps to go. My Fitbit says it is 2:50 in the PM, and I have whatever it was, 180 steps to go. That's why the Fitbit does these things, not just LPP1, but because inactivity matters. Summation of inactivity throughout the day, hour after hour after hour after hour, accumulates, let's call it badness in your body, accumulates a risk in your body. So that leads us to these sorts of slogans, right? Sitting is the new smoking, even for runners. And so this is really what we're talking about is if you just sit and sit and sit and sit and then go run, you're still having, I don't care if you're a runner, that's not offsetting the risk, the effect of sitting. The active time, sitting is the new smoking. 7 ways a sedentary lifestyle is killing you. All right, let's get into the Huffington Post. Sitting is the new smoking. You're seeing a cliche developing here. Ways a sedentary lifestyle is killing you. I mean, just Dr. James Levine. You see him being cited here, director of the Mayo Clinic, Arizona State University Obesity Solutions Initiative, and inventor of the treadmill desk. But so James Levine is really the hugest name for all these things. But this movement of sitting is the new smoking. All right, let's get to Forbes. Is sitting the new smoking? And obviously the answer is yes. The way that it characterizes it. Should I be sedentary, laying down, or sitting? Is there a better of the two evils? No. I have not seen literature that compares those two now. There's conditional responses of sometimes people lie down and the blood pressure response is very different. You might see O2, if you do like a pulse oximetry, you might see that go down a little bit when lying. If you're reclined and you have GERD, right, esophageal reflux, that can be exacerbated by certain positions. But from the perspective of like physiological deterioration, this sort of immediate onset atrophy, this deterioration of the body, I don't know a difference between sitting and lying. So I don't have a good answer there. My hunch is there's not that much of a difference, but on a case by case basis, maybe you'll see some small differences. the reasons we sit. Don't write any of this stuff down, like the reasons we sit. But like 86% of Americans are sitting. Maybe it's more now, right? This is in the era of pre-quarantine. And quarantine, I wonder what it's like, and why it's probably reasonable to invest in pharmacological companies that make things for the medications for depression and statins maybe and metformin and looking at some of these sitting related illnesses, uh, maybe start investing in those companies. But people sit a lot, and there's a number of explanations. But one generation after another, life advances so quickly. I mean, your parents and you and the generation that will follow you, it's so different. My grandparents to my parents to me to today's 5-year-olds and whatever. I mean, it's so different. But you look at go back to the 1860s. This is the 1885. It's a motor wagon. It's a Benz motor wagon, and so these are cars, right? But I mean, like these things, maybe they got the same gas mileage as your car today, but people weren't real. I mean, you start to develop cars, and people walk less and less and less and less and less and less and less, and the number of cars as this just works its way into the United States and everywhere else in the world, we're seeing less and less activity. And it's so easy to do these analyses in places like Uganda because there are there are regions of Uganda where nobody has vehicles. And okay, how much do you walk on an average? And you start getting some of these data, and you can look at their health outcomes and compared to people who I have a pickup and a boda boda, which means little scooter, border to border, whatever is what a boda boda, and but so you can start doing some of these analyses and look at people with really the same climate and roughly the same diet, and you can control for diet and stuff and movement. Eliminating movement with kind of automated things is not a way to bolster health. But even the way we sit, you don't have to get up to walk anymore. You put these casters on the chairs, and you just sort of like chair yourself around. And the intercoms, right? This is 19th century. We're seeing intercoms where you just kind of summon your butler that way. And looking at the ergonomic society was formed in 1952, meaning we spend so much time sitting that we have to actually inform people of how to be sedentary better because it's so punishing. These chairs are calculated to just destroy our posture and back, and so how do we sit even more than we are without dying at the end of our work shift? And okay, ergonomic society, so we can transition into a seriously sedentary society. And how do we eat? Right, the way we eat is going to affect our like, I mean, there's a diet that you could do that's just make it yourself. Do you want to eat cupcakes? Fine, eat as many cupcakes as you want, but make them yourself, right, from scratch. I mean, no, don't make them yourself from like, oh, I put it in the oven and I bought them that way. I mean, if you want cake and pie and ice cream and make it yourself. If you make it yourself, you can eat as much as you want. People lose weight that way because like, wow, it's a lot of work making my own food. But so the way we eat affects our physical activity levels. And soccer, I mean, just look at electronic gaming. It's huge today. And before COVID hit, a year before or something like that, I sent this email to administration at Pacific saying, why don't you form esports, an esports program here? I mean, there's tons of people. I mean, like, you watch people walk around campus capturing Pokemon. Form esports. We're going to have a huge team, and it's essentially free to run these things. You do it from your house and compete. And there's universities doing this, and why aren't we one of them? And they wrote back this very dismissive thing, and like, man, imagine if we had an esports program during the age of COVID. That would be running, right? It would be so successful. And like, I don't know why administration doesn't listen to anything any professor has ever said. So, but the way we play video gaming is a huge industry, and it's displacing outdoor gaming. And it's, males, females across the lifespan are doing this. The way we date, right? Operation Match. I mean, this is like 1965, but today there's any number like, do you want to date somebody who is afraid of fruit flies but not spiders, and loves hiking, but not anything with sand in it, and hates candles? Okay, here's the website for you. Like, it's not Operation Match anymore. Um, I remember bulletin board systems, and like there's this game called Lord, who's Legend of the Red Dragon, and it was like this role playing game where you fight monsters, but it was all text. Right? It's like, and then you swing your sword and you hit the dragon for 6 points of damage or whatever. But it was the bulletin board system. It's dial-up mode, and it makes all that obnoxious noise and stuff. And life isn't like that anymore, right? Life isn't like that anymore. And you look at this social media as sort of how we socialize. The way we socialize is very sedentary. It's not like, let's go socialize, we're hiking. But that's not really the thing that people do anymore. It's how much time am I on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and it's not healthy, right? When we're seeing that the stuff isn't healthy, the more sedentary we become and the more disengaged we become, the less happy we find ourselves. And Stephanie, present on call, unless you've left from boredom, an ACSM abstract of hers a couple of years ago was on sedentary behavior and seasonal affective disorder, and you get into obesity and look at BMIs, and the increase of BMI preceding the onset of diagnoses, and the diagnoses of depression weren't really as high during what you would expect from seasonal affective disorder, from the cloudy weather and stuff, is sort of this behavioral thing of, oh, I'm sedentary, and that comes first. Now, there are some limitations to that study, but the what it was hinting at is very believable. So we sort of just displace everything, right? Handwriting and sitting down and writing, and there's a met value to this stuff, a metabolic equivalent where you're burning calories to these things. Katie Bowman, from her book Chapter 4, there's a nice line about sitting where she says, starting school at around age 5, you found yourself squirming in a chair for hours on end. Sitting was not in your nature. But after a couple years, sitting in your chair would be your most practiced skill, trumping time spent reading, writing, playing games, and physical education in school. Like a ninja of sitting, you practiced sitting still in a chair more than any other activity, with hours and hours and hours in training, with no other learned activity even coming close in time spent practicing. So we think of ourselves as soccer players and tennis players and water polo and baseball and all of these activities. We sit more than we spend, more than the hours we spend on a tennis court or in the pool or on the baseball diamond. We sit way more than that. And so what are the muscles becoming accustomed to swinging a tennis racket or to sitting? Well, to sitting, because that's what they're exposed to most. The stressor they see most often and most abundantly in terms, the prolonged nature of it is sitting, and so the muscles respond to the stresses they see, and so we become very good at sitting. Now, you've seen this before, also Chapter 4 in this book. So if you sit like this forever and you stand up, we all think we're there. Not really, right? Not really, because we sit for so long that we adapt to it. Right? This is not an accommodation. This is not a short-term, readily reversible accommodation. This is an adaptation. This finds its way into our tissues with a degree of permanence. Can it be undone? Sure, but it's going to be tough, and it's going to take a really long time. You're going to have to show your tissues very different stressors for a very long time before you're going to undo the damage done by sitting, both physiological and kinesiological, biomechanically. And so same thing with casts. When you put on that cast, that is the absence, right, of the non-squatting is a stressor, it's a trigger, it's a signal for adaptation. Now, there's many reasons, and we have to be sympathetic here. We have to be sympathetic. I mean, many of us, not everybody. I'm, Liam, you're in Australia, but many of us live in Stockton, and so this is the equivalent of Stockton and Cleveland. If why are the kids not playing outside? I don't let my kids play outside. They get involved in drugs or they get shot, right? And so sometimes the community that people live in is too dangerous. Video games are a form of self-preservation, right? They save lives. You give a kid an Xbox or a PlayStation or something, and it saves their life because they don't go outside and get killed. And so it depends on the community you live in, and Stockton is one such community. And so sitting is a way of prolonging life. And so there is consideration, and we have to be sympathetic here. But remember, no matter the reason that we're sitting, just because it's like, it's really dangerous outside, my cells will forgive me. My cells, my tissues, my organs, they understand that it's dangerous outside, right? That bullets could rip through them if they weren't sitting here. So they'll give me a free pass. No, they won't. It doesn't matter why you're sitting. We can be sympathetic to the reasons people have to sit. Illness, right? A handicap of some sort, a dangerous community that you can't afford to leave. We can be very sympathetic, but we still have to address the underlying phenomenon of disease is going to manifest throughout the alphabet. You're not just going to get one of them. And all of these stressors, when you look at things like physical inactivity, smoking, blood pressure, genetics, when you have multiple stressors, it's not a summation, right? It's a multiplication in terms of the risk of adverse cardiovascular events, cardiovascular disease. The risk here is not just the summation of stressors. Well, smoking gives me this much stress. Sedentary behavior gives me this much stress. So here's the amount of stress I have. No, here's the amount of stress you have, right? They compound each other. And so with each additional stressor, let's say of like risk factor, not just stressor, like, oh, I walked. That's not risk factors. With each additional risk factor, it's not a simple summation. It's a multiplication of total cardiac risk. All right, let's end there today and chat about whatever you have to chat about. And then we'll finish this idea of physical inactivity on Wednesday, and then we'll move into injuries on Friday. You mentioned that not everyone has a psoas minor as a genetic. Yeah, it is both, Celeste, your question, it is random and genetics. It's sort of the random piece of genetics, but I've never seen the literature of inheritance. It seems likely that if going back to your ancient lineage, nobody's ever had one. I think if both mom and dad lack it, then it's likely that you're going to lack it. I haven't seen the support for that in the literature, but I would be at least surprised, if not stunned, if there wasn't a genetic component to it. And I don't know how to tell if you have that thing. The palmaris longus is the only one I know how to tell. The plantaris, right, it runs parallel with gastroc and soleus, but it has its own tendon. The gastroc and soleus share one. The plantaris, which is this little useless, ridiculous thing, gets its own tendon. That's a unfair allocation of resources if the body has ever assigned it. But the palmaris longus, right, you can just do this, or you just like pinch like that. And like this one, I have one, and I don't on this side. Everything else, I think you actually have to like operate on a person, maybe an MRI. What stressors are in your guys' lives that are both good and bad? Sitting. We're all sitting now, I think. I mean, some of you probably get up and move around during lecture. I tell people when I'm lecturing live that, if they want to get up and stretch and wander around, so go for it. Move around if you want. The pandemic is a stressor in a number of ways. I think Gurdeep is going to have a story about how the more direct application of stress, but the psychological and social application of stress, and the little bit of concern that we have. I've had dreams, which says that unconsciously this is a concern. I have dreams that I'm in some supermarket in the middle of a line, and I'm like, oh shit, I forgot there's a pandemic, and like everyone around me, nobody has a mask, and it's funny. I went to breathing constantly through a mask. Lexi, yeah, that is a stressor. Yeah, breathing constantly through a mask, and every once in a while you're like, I just want to have some okay, I'm back to it. And it's all that like moisture in your face, like you take the mask off and you're just like red and zitty, and it's just like, okay, I've just been breathing in my face for 3 hours. But I had blood work this morning. I went to the hospital for a blood work just down Hammer Lane and Sutter. And I went super early because it opens at 6:30. And what I don't want to do is show up at 7, 8 o'clock when there's a big line and I'm waiting in the waiting room with all these people who have no idea how to wear a fucking mask. Like, oh no, it's covering my lower lip. Fuck you. Like, you learn how to like put on. Yeah, like, did you put your pants on right? Did you come on? And so I didn't want to do that. So I showed up super early, and there were 2 people in line when I got there. I got there like 20 minutes before it opened. I was going to go up and just wait in line, and there were 2 people. It was a married couple. I assume they were married. It was like they were 80 years old, and an old man, old woman, and they looked like farmers. And so as I walked up, I'm walking close to them. I have like a N95 mask on, and I'm walking up to them, and the old lady, they're both wearing masks, and the old lady goes, and it's like fake coughing. And that told me that there's no way these people have COVID, because they are being so cautious by fake coughing to make sure I don't go stand next to them. The reason that she's doing this, it didn't sound anything like a cough. And so I'm like, oh, phew, now I know the people ahead of me don't have COVID because they're coughing. Because they're trying to do it together. When you walk into a bathroom, a public bathroom, and there are stalls, and the people go to let everybody know that I'm in there. There's somebody in this stall, right? Please don't go open the door. I don't want to have the conversation that says, excuse me, sir, I'm sitting in this stall and I'm really dehydrated and I ate meat last night. I might be 6 minutes or whatever. Nobody wants to have that conversation, and so instead of having the well, I want the door open move, which is weird, but for some reason it won't open. Let me try. People just grunt like that. That's what the cough was to prevent me from standing close to them. It's like, these people don't have COVID. And then the person who showed up after me, I'm like, that person probably does. But COVID, it is a stressor, right? Even if you don't have it, there are limitations in life. There are social limitations in life. There's people aren't seeing each other for Thanksgiving, and there are stressors. There are behaviors we used to take for granted we don't get to do, more physical inactivity and the threat and all of that. Working out, as a stressor. Kendall, if you do it too much in Gurdeep, school, also a stressor, can be a huge stressor. There was a question earlier which I'm interested in. I must have missed it. Oh, there. Oh, I guess I missed it. So if we would have been standing during school since day one instead of sitting, would this improve the level athletes could perform, or is the adaptation going to be specific? Yeah, probably specific, Ross. So if during school, well, it depends. Yeah, exactly. It is specific. So if the stressor is something where you need endurance, right? What you're standing in school the whole time and you really need endurance in type 1 muscle fibers, no type 2 activation, anything like that. So you're the softball or baseball player and you have to stand up against the chain link fence and say, go you players. In that case, sure, that there's going to be a metabolic adaptation. Maybe you're going to get more girder structure in the muscle, some connective tissue in those type 1s. You might get maybe a little bit more myoglobin or something, maybe more mitochondria, maybe more blood supply. There's probably a bunch of maybes in there. The only thing that I think might compromise performance in sitting as opposed to standing, maybe some postural deviations. You might have better kind of pelvic mobility if you are standing and wandering around and walking during class as opposed to sitting, potentially, something like that. Alcohol, Nathaniel, I see your stressor. Alcohol in moderation. We know that one. That one's good. Stress in moderation. Stress in excess. Maybe we are getting into a riskier domain. But excess is different for different people. Andre the Giant, his excess, I mean, his normal is like lethal for other people. I think he meant in moderation. Yeah, but I think Nathaniel's moderation would be my excess. No, I'm not saying, Nathaniel's liver is 50 times my liver, but I think, Nathaniel's, total blood volume and amount of, capacity to absorb and metabolize alcohol probably is certainly better than mine. What else? Anybody have any good stories?
I have a question.
Yeah.
When is our test?
I don't know. I think it's on the syllabus somewhere. We can move it a little bit if people are like, this is horrible. I would rather be here than there. But if you pull up the syllabus, it's going to be on there somewhere.
Okay. And then
we have plenty of time. There's only 2 tests this semester, so it's not like it's soon.
Okay. And then is it still going to be like multiple choice or free response? I'm sorry. I just want to know what I'm preparing for.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do. I say in the past, all of my graduate classes had teams. It's weird doing teams in a digital setting where you can't look each other in the eye and compete and say mean things to your opposing team, like to your opponents. So I don't quite know. There'll be a lot of multiple choice, and I'll probably do a little bit of written, and I might do some teamwork, and we'll start picking out teams, and so I'm not really sure yet, because I do grad classes different from how I do undergrad classes in terms of scoring and stuff. But I don't know how to do it in COVID.
Sounds good.
But yeah, it's just a normal-ish test in a while, and we only have a couple of them, and yeah. Genevieve, please, no teams. All right, maybe I won't do teams, because it gets aggressive. People find themselves saying hostile things that, like, oh, I can't believe that came out of my mouth, and I find myself, unless we get 3 hours for team exams. Yeah. Okay. We'll figure. I'm open to suggestions and kind of feedback that's actually usable. I'm open, because I don't know how to do this stuff and quarantine tests in grad school. What you think is both effective and fair and not painful. I'm happy to do whatever, as long as it's like the most pleasant thing for you, but also realistic and fair at the same time, merging those 2 worlds. The syllabus says March 5th for exam 1. Okay, so a little over a month, a little over a short month away. But again, if we're getting to that time, and all of you are like, oh, it would be so much better on March whatever, so we can whatever. It's a grad class. This is not undergrad. I'm pretty rigid, but anything else for today? All right, let's pick up on Wednesday. Go indulge in your stresses.